Good day, colleagues.
Yeah, well, Tony.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah. Oh no, I'm just testing if you can see me and if I'm audible.
You are audible. I'm at the restaurant. I just arrived in Mokopane, as I mentioned that we are traveling to Limpopo
Yes.
for the documentary and science engagement.
Yeah.
So please bear with me if you feel that my sound is a little bit annoying, but I've asked them to reduce it.
Okay. I hope the link works because on my computer, I'm using somebody else's computer. On my computer, it locked me out, it kicked me out.
Is it fine, bro?
Yeah, we'll just use it like this.
Okay. No.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello, good morning, colleagues.
Good day, Professor Pandeli.
How are you doing?
I'm good, and yourself?
I'm all right, can't complain.
Good that you could join us.
Yes.
Yes. Good day, colleagues. It's a minute past 12, and people are still joining in. I don't see Professor Feza. I'm not sure if she's joined our DVC for Research and Postgraduate Studies, so that we can commence with the program. Professor Feza, are you in the meeting? Doesn't look like she's joined. There are still people who are joining the meeting. So I think I will allow another minute or so that people can join up and then we can commence.
Good afternoon, colleagues.
Good afternoon, Prof.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Prof. Banduni, for the link. Colleagues, are we all in?
Yes, Prof, we are in. I think we can commence as 5 minutes past 12.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Mkhalak. Thank you. Then I will start. Welcome, colleagues. Let me start by introducing myself. I am Nosisi Feza. I am the new DVC Research and Postgraduate Studies at the University of Venda. I therefore would like to start our webinar today from yesterday, and I feel honored to be part of this team because as I am looking at the people who have attended, most of them I am so familiar with. Welcome, colleagues. Today, therefore, we are going to discuss and hear from our panelists about a perspective on how scholars perceive attitudes to science in policymaking in South Africa. This is an interesting topic that we are going to deal with today. And I will be happy, therefore, to introduce the panelists. Colleagues, to save time and to learn from yesterday's session that we had, I think it will be very important for me when I introduce our panelists, I introduce all of them, and then I allow them time to engage us in their presentations, which are not that long. They have to use 10 minutes. So for me to make sure that I do not waste their times, let me start therefore by introducing Dr. Skejane from Human Sciences Research Council. Dr. Skejane is currently one of our champions, I can say, in the health sciences. She graduated her MTech and DTech in Johannesburg, in the University of Johannesburg. She is our medical technologist who is specialized in biophotonics, which is in application of the light-based laser medicine to a biological system in a simulated diabetic model, for example, as well as a photodynamic therapy for cancer treatment. Dr. Skejane currently is a strategic partnerships director at the HSRC. What I would like Dr. Skejane to do currently is to show her face, because I will introduce the next panelist. Thank you, my doctor. Welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you, Doc. Then let me introduce our second panelist colleagues. We've seen our Dr. Skejane. Our next panelist is Prof. SCIENCEIN Mampweli. Prof. SCIENCEIN Mampweli has a master's degree from the University of Venda, a PhD from the University of Fort Hare. What is interesting about Prof is that he also has some certificates from renewable energy, also a mini MBA certificate in green energy from the Green Power Academy in Britain. Prof is currently working at the University of Stellenbosch. As I am trying to save time, I will not share all his accolades with us, but I can say he is one of our experts today who will be able to talk to us a lot about the perspectives that we are looking on how scholars perceive attitude to science in policy making. Thank you very much, Prof. Mampweli. Colleagues, then I will move to our next candidate, who is Prof. Kilobogile Montaung. Prof. Montaung is a biomedical scientist. Prof, would like to see your face. And he is currently a Director of Technology Transfer and Innovation at the Durban University of Technology. Prof. Montaung is also a Fulbright scholar. And she also is leading Prof. Montaung on commercialization and entrepreneurship. Prof. Mantaung, I do not see you. Is she with us, colleagues?
She's going to join a little bit later. She's finishing off another workshop.
We will see her face then when she joins us, colleagues. Then let us move to the next colleague, who is Dr. Botai. Can we see your face, Dr. Botai? Dr. Botai is a chief scientist at the South African Weather Services, leading a team of scientists doing research and developing weather and climate products and services in support for strategic sectors of economy, including water resources, agriculture, health, energy, and socio-economic research applications. There are also a number of accolades that he got internationally. And I can also say that he's one of our expertise today that will be working with us. His current research interest is including data science, which we all know has become very important during the time of the fourth industrial revolution. Welcome, Dr. Botai. Colleagues, I will go for the next one. Our Professor Sylvester Mpandeli. Can we see your face, Prof, if you are around? Thank you so much, my Prof. Prof Mpandeli is an executive manager at the Water Research Commission of South Africa and an adjunct professor of Faculty of Science and Engineering and Agriculture at the University of Venda. He is managing the key strategic area that deals with water utilization in agriculture, which I think then he is our lifeline. So we need to keep you, Prof. Because currently our country is struggling with water. So he is a former chairperson of African Regional Working Group. And also he has quite a number of accolades. Colleagues, he is extensively published. I would like us to welcome our Professor, Prof. Mpandeli. Welcome, Prof. Thank you so much. Our colleagues, we also have my colleague, Dr. Castro. Wow, it's been a long time. Dr. Michael Castro from HSRC, I hope. Dr. Castro is an acting director of science in society unit within the Impact Center of the Human Sciences Research Council, and a professor of practice at the Department of Science and Technology, NRF, Newton Fund, Trilateral Research Chair in Transformative Innovation. He is also highly involved in Fourth Industrial Revolution and Sustainable Development at the University of Johannesburg. So now what I can say about Dr. Castro, his skills and research is really on innovation systems, the public understanding of science, which I think therefore he will be quite relevant to discuss today with us. Colleagues, thank you very much. I think maybe he might be one of those who will join us later because I didn't see his face. Prof. Oh, wow. Hi, Mike. How, my dog? It's been a long time since we've seen each other. Thank you very much. Colleagues, then we move to our next colleagues under indigenous knowledge systems. Are they part of today, Prof. Mkhalaka?
Yes, we have advocate Dr. Farelo Machize.
Yes, okay, let me introduce her then.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We have today advocate Farelo Machize. Can you see your face, advocate? Advocate is a senior lecturer in the Department of IKS and Heritage Studies at the University of Venda. She is doing quite a lot also on things that are very relevant today, our social, cultural anthropology, and indigenous law. So I think I need to make friends with her. I need to know more about indigenous laws.
Hi, Lizeke. Can you just confirm if...
Excuse me, colleagues, is somebody speaking? Okay, thank you. Then Advocate Dr. Machize also works with traditional leaders and traditional healers and other indigenous knowledge practitioners. So we will hear quite extensively about indigenous knowledges and also the perspectives that we are discussing today. Our next candidate is Prof. Chisikawe. Prof. Chisikawe, can you please show your face? He is an associate professor of botany at the University of Venda. He graduated his PhD in
Prof.
Yes, Prof.
Yeah, I'm not part of the panel today.
Oh.
Yes.
You are part of the panel tomorrow?
On Friday, Prof.
Or Friday.
Yes.
I am hoping there for Prof. Makhalaka that I've introduced everyone who is part of the panel today.
Yes, you have. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Therefore, colleagues, then we can move with our program from here and start with our first panelist. I see that we are supposed to have, or Prof, you are saying you are tomorrow, but in this, we are supposed to have Prof. Chisikawe or advocate, so therefore it will be advocate Dr. Machitse who is going to address now for 10 minutes. Yes. Over to you, Advocate Machitse.
Thank you, Chair. Let me share my slides. Can you see the slides?
Yes, Advocate.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. My presentation is around a perspective on how scholars perceive attitude to science in policymaking in South Africa. But then I wanted just to outline the importance of a policy and what a policy is. A policy is a general statement that guides decision-making which applies to repetitive situations. It provides guidance, consistency, accountability, efficiency, and clarity on how organizations operate and offer members of the organization with guidelines and principles to follow. So who are policymakers? These are important group of people with whom scientific research should be communicated, which are government, non-governmental organizations, and business or private institutions. And the policymakers' perception of research, researchers and policymakers have different objectives and are entrenched within different bureaucratic systems. As a consequence, the two groups value different types of information and they may use distinct languages. So to improve synergy between researchers and policymakers, they should try as much as possible to establish rapport, personal trust, and respect, since these are important enabling factors for the transformation of research into policy. Why are some research not influence policy? Time factor could be one, because there could be evidence that is required to support agent decision, but by the time the research findings are disseminated, the specific issue may no longer be a priority. And policymakers might not know about the research because the result could not have been published. And if they are published, the publications were not accessible and readily available to the general public. In some instances, the publishers need a subscription fee, which makes it impossible for the policymakers to get the research findings. So what is the relation? Why some research do not influence policy again is that policymakers might not know, a relationship between research and policy. Science communication through research plays a crucial role in transmuting research into policy, and attitudes towards science and policy should influence each other profoundly. And as a result, researchers and policymakers should understand each other so that they are able to work in partnership. Research plays a major role in the policy-making process. So there's a need for scientists and policymakers to interact in order to develop policies that have an impact in the society. So as we all know, knowledge shapes policy, since research can be used instrumentally to adjust policy, and policymakers draw on evidence-based research to produce more effective policies. Evidence-based policymaking has two goals. Number one, it has to use what we already know to make policy decisions. And number two, it has to build more knowledge to better inform future decisions. So an evidence-based policymaking framework may ultimately promote bipartisan collaboration in important policy areas. So why is evidence important in the IKS policymaking? In the IKS space, we should look at more effective ways of using research evidence to support policy. In that way, we shall be discussing some possibilities in what is coming to be known as knowledge transfer from research to policy and practice. So there has to be a closer relationship between research, policy, and practice. So the truth is that not all policies will be informed by research, and not all research shall inform policy. So for research to inform policy, that particular research should be policy specific. A policy has a wide application and does not, and what does that mean to IKS? IKS is localized, which means it is specific to that cultural group. So policymakers may have concerns over whether IKS research projects can be generalized to a broader area. A question one could ask is, how do we then ensure our knowledge diversity works for us in a uniform way that includes all cultures? So in my view, our diversity is seen as a challenge. It is time to see things differently by looking at how we can involve knowledge holders by having dialogues where researchers and policymakers can learn from each other. Local governments also should establish localized policies on IK-based research, which will inform uniformity in national policies, policy imperatives that can be established. Instead of having a top-down approach, what may be needed in IKS is to develop provincial approaches based on local groups and their IK holders, and use the down-top approach. So in that way, the policies will address relevant matters. And sometimes it might be difficult for scientists and policymakers to work together, because there could be a challenge where policies do not resonate with what the researchers are advocating for. For example, in Madagascar, they were advocating for the introduction of traditional medicine to cure the coronavirus. So appreciating the role of traditional medicine, like the organization COVID Organics, the World Health Organization tells it to review indigenous therapies and advise on the efficacy and safety of the traditional medicine. So the World Health Organization seems to be reluctant to use the medication, since they are still questioning its safety and its efficacy. So this also is a setback when IKS policies are to be formulated, because this test might take a long time, and if policy should be pushed by evidence. Researchers should be proactive. The researcher should contact policymakers who are in a position to use their work. The researcher should detail to the policymaker of the implications of the research and how it must support policy making. So the government should also increase commissioned research, where the policymaker contacts a researcher for information. In Australia, for example, in order for researchers to collaborate with policymakers, they have established what they refer to as Science Meet Parliament. At these meetings, scientists or researchers and members of parliament meet to discuss mutually agreed priorities. This assists in opening communication channels between scientists and politicians, and building a cohort of scientists who are comfortable engaging with politicians and the policy making process. Whether or not policymakers hold scientific qualifications, they are expected to understand the often complex policies they draft and approve, as well as the supporting evidence. Similarly, researchers typically do not have policy experience and often struggle to engage with the official processes that are involved. So the implementation of a science meets parliament or a similar initiative in South Africa might involve a broad range of policymakers, including political representatives and senior staff of government departments who meet face-to-face with researchers. Such action might start to close the communication gap between these two groups and begin to form a community of practice for evidence-based policymaking in South Africa. If this is encouraged, better translation of science into policy will be achieved. What are the challenges of IKS in policy formulation? IKS is abstract because it is said to be encumbered by rituals and spirituality. So policy-making process needs concrete evidence, and that becomes a limitation on its own because the research cannot be used by policy makers. It is also localized, which means that sometimes it is only understood by that particular culture. So since policies have a general application, it might be difficult to generalize that evidence. The other challenge is that policymakers would argue that IKS has its own components that cannot be subjected to science, evidence, and code. So those who believe in it would always maintain that it has been there since time immemorial, and that's their own belief systems. So researchers have a tendency to compare conventional methodologies and IKF methodologies, while IKS has its own methodology and modalities. What are the recommendations? The recommendations are that if South Africa wants to do justice to its claim of being a progressive science nation that strives for scientific excellence, high-level cooperation, and taking over a leading role on the African continent, government must support its own national researchers with sufficient financial means. It should also foster collaboration between researchers and policymakers, and also have increased commissioned research where they'll make specific research calls for specific areas, and researchers would, should know that they are writing for a development of a policy. And policy makers should also include IK holders in policy formulation that relates to IKS, and they should consult widely. Again, institutions of higher learning should also assist and organize for policy briefs. Capacity building for politicians to understand that academics should influence policy is also one of the recommendations, and that researchers, on the other hand, should know how policies are formulated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate, for the challenging presentation and comprehensive one in nature. There are quite a number of issues that you are bringing on the table, and I think we will have to dot them down so that we can be able to ask the questions during the question and answer time. However, I want you to think further in terms of how will it work to bring the scientists and policymakers into a space where they need each other, they know that they need each other for them to be able to be influential and also to be evidence-based, as you are indicating in their formulating the policy. So just keep that in mind when you are responding to the questions that Prof. Mokgalaka will be leading. Thank you very much. I highly appreciate what you've just done and opened our minds on. Thank you very much, Advocate. Can I therefore ask Dr. Skejane from HSRC to lead us with her presentation? Colleagues, the question and answer will be at the end of the presentation, and it will be facilitated by Prof. Mokgalaka. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Skejane.
Thank you very much, Prof. Let me also greet the colleagues who have joined the meeting. I think the question around the perspectives on how scholars perceive attitudes to science in policy making is a valid one. But also, I think it is a question that should equally be extended to members of the society or communities, because I believe that, and I think all of us also do believe that the science is not only the science that belongs to those who practice it as scientists. Prof, I'm going to ask if I could put off my video because I'm not certain that I have confidence in the connectivity levels.
Yes, my colleague, you can.
Thank you. So, of course, I have been asked to touch on this topic with regards to the vaccines manufacturing or the contestations thereof around vaccines. I think with the COVID pandemic, we've had several pandemics, but I think in South Africa in particular, those other pandemics had not posed so much threat or put pressure on the system to innovate or to think harder in terms of planning for future pandemics. But of course, now with the current pandemic, it has shaken us. And of course, there has not been much talk about medicines and manufacturing of vaccines like there has been of recent times. A number of policies had been put or together or proposed, such as like my colleague had talked about the African traditional medicines. There are policies such as that in South Africa, but they had not taken off or seen the light of really us getting to make use of those products. Of course, we do find them in our shelves oftentimes, but they will always carry that they are not, apologies, then the is the Medicines Council. So they were not evaluated or per se sort of endorsed by the MCC. So there were products that were considered safe, but then their clinical results were not something that the councils could speak comfortably on. So where I'm getting with this is that as scientists also play a significant role in the knowledge production landscape. I think it is important to also, and it is a gap as well, understanding how do we make use or enable pathways that can influence policy. Definitely correctly, not all the science or the research will inform policy, but as a country, and I think also I'm speaking from a position of operating from a research council that is charged with producing a knowledge that can speak to or can influence policy. But that has also proven to be difficult over the years, because who is at the center of policy? The implementer, does the implementer understand the science? These are the questions we have asked ourselves, I think, as members of the scientific fraternity. But I think also going back to the current debates around vaccines or the contestations around that, we have seen just how much we have also been neglecting the issues of understanding not only the science, but also understanding the trade policies or regulations, understanding the politics embedded within these manufacturing, which I think that this has brought us closer to understanding the landscape of science, if it is also divorced from the political issues or the political environment and the political knowledge of understanding how this how knowledge or science can be perceived by others who are who are practicing it for the purposes of functioning in the policy spaces, because also adoption of these innovations or understanding these rules, they do not find themselves in a vacuum. We are required to understand the environment in which politics and the players in the policy making, where at what point do we begin to miss each other? And I think, as I mentioned earlier on, that as much as oftentimes we may claim that we want to influence policy, it is a very difficult terrain, simply because I think from the foundations of training, we find that the lack of transdisciplinarity also contributes to widening the gap of science not being able to speak to policy environment or being easily adopted in the policy environment. So I think really the question of scholars perceiving the attitudes to policy, to science in policy making, as I mentioned, that it's a valid question. It is a question that also requires us to revisit how science is being understood or taught by the learners as they enter the university. And probably one might argue that it must happen from a high school level. But then some of the challenges that we sit with is that oftentimes even the science that comes from the grassroots or the social innovation, it gets lost in between simply because of this gap that exists of misunderstanding. So in short, colleagues, I think what I'm really trying to say with these contestations around vaccines manufacturing, what they have shown us is that ourselves, we aspired for the vaccines to be manufactured by our country or our continent, but then we got exposed to just how it is not issues of patents, for instance, that play a role in the contestations. But then we also have real issues that are hidden, and they're hidden in power structures. That I think when we do talk of science, we also do not pay much attention to them, and it is something that is worth looking into. There are so many opportunities, I think, and COVID has really shown us that there are so many opportunities that we could look into. I think, for instance, now the continent is thinking of increasing the production of vaccines by 2040 to about 60%. But also there had been misunderstandings in terms of when vaccines are being manufactured, who are the purchasers, where is the market located? We had even neglected the fact that Africa is sitting with a huge population that might be of use to itself in terms of understanding the barriers, understanding these opportunities, and also receiving the internal support, meaning either from local, governing structures, which is of course the government, and also the cooperation between the countries. And that has come to the light now that these are some of the strategies that will probably put Africa ahead. And so in closing, I think also as we think about these contestations, they are just not contestations around who holds the power to manufacture. We've had interesting and beautiful announcements being made by various countries in the continent, for example, starting from Senegal, Morocco, Egypt, South Africa as well. But I think one of the most important one of the examples that I can quote is that when these announcements are being announced in terms of manufacturing, or now moving from just doing the fills and finishes of active pharmaceutical ingredients of vaccines, some of the pertinent questions that we should also think about as scientists is to understand who gets to benefit in the chain, and where is this chain located? Is it simply a mere assimilation or acceptance of pharmaceutical ingredients being pushed into the countries, but not having immediate and direct long-term benefits to the much needed economy and also our societies? So yeah, in short, I just put it there so that we can debate the issues further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. You are really like extending and also going deeper onto what Advocate was saying. And you are also bringing how the broadness of the issues in terms of us thinking about making relationships between science and policy making and the political landscape. You are also looking at the transdisciplinarity that lacks in the system that can take us forward. But then you also broadened the scope to the continent itself, and you highlighted quite a number of issues that might be barriers, but issues that we need to face and debate so that we can be able. But there is something that you brought that is power and its position and positioning ourselves within that power. Who has more power in the world, financially and as well politically, to take certain decisions? And how do we situate ourselves? Where are we, so that we can be able, therefore, to achieve our aspirations? So those are the number of things that I've gathered in your talk, and thank you very much. And we will see how other colleagues are seeing this. Can we therefore, colleagues, move to our next speaker, Dr. Mampueli, to come on board, also sharing his view on a perspective on how scholars perceive attitudes to science in policymaking in South Africa. Over to you, Prof. Mampueli.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to share my screen quickly. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Prof.
All right, thank you, Chair. I just used this topic, is renewable energy an answer to our energy challenges? And then I will talk to a number of issues and then indicate the role of science and engineering in the energy space in South Africa. So this is how the traditional power system looks before any disruptors. So you have your power plant generating electricity, which is traditionally in South Africa based on coal, and then you have your transmission lines, and then you have your distribution lines to the houses, and then there's that balance between the supply and the demand. Now, the first disruptor that disrupting that kind of a situation is climate change. Climate change leads to the rise in global temperature, uncharacteristic and unpredictable weather conditions, extreme weather phenomena such as rising sea levels, floods, heat waves, droughts, loss of food, loss of shelter, damage to property, loss of life. And these are some of the photos showing the impact of global warming, this flooding in Mozambique and at times in Cape Town, the droughts, the impact of drought, the water shortages, the animals dying, livestock dying, and all that. Heat waves that come with a lot of other, issues as a result of that. And then we've got the second disruptor, which is basically the demand, the electricity demand, which has been rising across the world. And then you have your third disruptor, which is the energy storage systems. What we've seen is that the energy storage systems are coming online quite rapidly, and with the invention mainly on the lithium-ion battery side, that is replacing most of the lead-acid batteries and stuff like that, and that is also driven by the decline in the price of these batteries, especially the lithium-ion batteries. You can see there's a sharp decline in the price, and alongside that, you can see the increase in the penetration of the battery storage systems. Now, if we look at the global energy resources, and visually you have the annual solar energy coming in, and then it gets divided into, some of it goes into photosynthesis, some of it goes into wind, some of it goes into hydroelectricity or hydropower. And this is now the total energy resources. From that big block that you see from the solar energy side, you have a fraction going to coal, another going to uranium, and then a fraction going to gas, and then another fraction going to oil. And you can see that the fraction of oil is not that much big, but we have all sorts of wars for oil around the world. We should be fighting for the sun. And that's the annual world consumption, which is way smaller than what you get from the sun itself. Again, under renewable energy, we have a lot of wind resources, a lot of ocean resources, biomass resources, geothermal resources. But everything comes from the sun, and then we have some hydro. And then another disruptor is still the renewable energy as a disruptor. You can see the significant cost reduction in the various energy sources, renewable energy sources, mostly the solar PV and the wind side of things. At some point, the cost is going down to 100%. In terms of the installations, you can see the operational capacities around the world with between the wind and solar PV. You can see Europe leading, China because they're making most of the PV systems, and South Africa we're sitting at about 5% renewable energy installations in the country, and I'll talk to the policy position of South Africa in a moment. And then we have what we call the small scale embedded generation or on the distribution networks. That is also increasing significantly in the country, and we have a number of policies that were informed by science along this in South Africa, and we have some of the projects along this line that are increasing as well. Now, in terms of the plans all over the world, people are planning new renewable energy as opposed to new coal power stations, and all that is basically informed by science, technology, and engineering. As the technology efficiencies increase with the research that scientists are doing, it leads to countries starting to believe in these systems, and then leading to what we're seeing now. Again, if you look at the South African landscape, we will be decommissioning about 11,000 megawatts of coal. This is in terms of the integrated resource plan, which is the country's plan and along the side of energy or renewable energy provision in the country. Now, this is where the science and engineering influences policy. So we have the integrated resource plan that is modeled based on the least cost technology derived from the levelized cost of generation for each technology. And science and engineering and technology plays a huge role in that model. The CSIR is also involved. ESCOM also does the modeling, and it ends up with the public and institutions also commenting. This is the process that was followed when they modeled the IRP 2018 and also the IRP 2019. That is the latest document. The assumptions and the preliminary base case were taken, and then they did the model using the scientific kind of model. So in this case, engineering, science, and technology has got a huge influence in terms of the direction that the country takes in the energy space. But we have some few challenges that are worth highlighting. South Africa is opening the space in the electricity supply market, and we've put up a number of initiatives, such as allowing municipalities to purchase directly from IPPs, the president's announcement of the threshold for electricity generation without a license to be increased from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts, ESCOM streamlining the process for wheeling electricity, the ministerial determination as the IRP 2019. So we have the integrated resource plan that where science plays a huge role in the ministerial determination. And then we have announcements such as the ones that the president made that are not necessarily informed by science, engineering, and technology. You have the process such as the one where municipalities are allowed to buy directly from IPPs where it's not necessarily informed by science, but in the background of that, it also involves the integrated resource plan, which is informed by science. So our challenges in the energy space are not that big in terms of the role that we play as scientists or academics in the space. ESCOM also does a lot of work with academics. We also have at Stellenbosch University and ESCOM chains power system studies, who looks at the power system in South Africa and then advise ESCOM on what needs to be changed or what needs to be improved. As things stand, we are busy working on a study that's looking at the allocation of renewable energy technologies for grid support. And that study it's a study that's going to inform ESCOM in terms of where they must strengthen their grid. We have meetings with them on a daily basis or on a monthly basis, reporting on the study, and so many other studies that we do for them. I thought I should include this slide just for interest's sake about the sustainable world, which is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of our children to meet their own. And I've indicated the individual carbon legacy. The lifetime emission of an individual is 1.6 million kg of carbon, and our children will have an emission of that much of carbon, and then if we become more efficient and we involved in things such as recycling and energy savings, we can reduce our emission by about 388,000 kgs. Chair, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mamphweli, for such an educational talk you've just made, taking us through from the traditional energies, introducing us to how the disruptors make their own influence, and to where we are and where our country is going, and also the low percentages of their activity, and although it is growing. And also, you have touched on this topic in an interesting manner on how in the energy space you are able to work with the policymakers. I think through the question and answer time, we will all learn on how to do that as you have done it to be where you are. And also you have also taught us, I think it was a lesson on how to decrease emission, and also the process, the recycling process and its importance looking to the future. Thank you so much. I will therefore, colleagues, like to call our next speakers. Please document down the questions you want to ask, and I think our chat space would be the best place so that Prof. Mukhalaka is able to chair. I am hoping, therefore, we have our Professor Montaung back with us at this time. Prof. Mukhalaka, I will hear from you.
Yes, Professor, she's with us. She will also show her face.
Welcome, Prof. Montaung. Can you please then grace us with your face? I can see your slides, but your face will be favorable at this moment because we were missing you.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. I think you can see my face, and then I'll just to show that I'm not a robot, I guess, and then I will be able to with my talk.
Thank you very much, my professor. Then you can therefore continue then with your talk. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you so much for inviting me just to come, and share. And I guess from the previous speaker, Prof was so lucky, to work with the policymakers and be able to listen. Some of us, but it's some of things that we're going to learn today. And for me, how I kind of understand my perspective as a scientist, by the way. Quick question, just to go straight to the point because of the time. I just got here just quickly, because policymakers, they are broad, and their role, what is actually their role in the society? And we always have problems with the policymaker. That's what people cannot do some of the things because of the policy. And how research can also be conducted so that they can also be incorporated when we do research from the beginning, so that we end up not talking about who is blaming what. Is it the scientist, is the policymaker? And then how it can also be implemented, and then why. And then what is important is actually who are we doing this. Let me now say this. In most cases, we all know that people who have political influence, those are policymakers, from my experience. So policymakers are people who have political influence that directly develops or change policies, regulation, rules, and directives. And it's a fact. And for me, I'm talking from experience because they've got that. And most of them, they are employed in government agencies. And I think we need to also to talk about this and not to shy away this. If it's not working, it's not working, and we need to be brutally honest with some of the things. Now, what is happening, and I think this is where we end up always going to talk about, is how we are doing research as a scientist. And also, are we involving them as well when we start planning our research? So in most cases, you will see that either scientists, they like to work in solo, even the engineering, and then there is no collaboration between us with the policymaker. And I'll tell you why. Scientists must also, they can always, and even in the engineering, they've got the tendency of always saying, oh my, you won't be able to understand my work. Oh my God, you won't understand my research. And immediately you say so. If you are an engineer or a scientist, you're doing the work and I don't understand it, then that on its own is a problem, because that work needs to be understood even with the layman's term. Now, this is where the problem is always going to come on the no collaboration with the scientist and the policymaker. And I think this is the problem where we are now started to have always these problems, because everybody wants to do whatever they wanted to do. Now, what are the challenges? The challenges are the following: that inaccessibility of the data to researchers, so that when you are a scientist, you are going to do the research, perhaps policymakers can give you the data so that you can see what you are going to do a research on. And on the other hand, which is very, somebody is just talking while I'm talking. No, just keep quiet, please. May you kindly.
Sorry, Prof. Let me attend to it. Colleagues, can you please mute yourselves because you are disturbing our presentation, please? Colleague, we're still listening.
Mute them.
Okay, the person who is in charge of this, can you please mute the other colleague?
Yes, I'm trying to locate who they are. Yes, I got them. Okay, you can continue.
Thank you very much. You can move forward, Prof. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you so much. So one of the challenges that I've just mentioned was the inaccessibility of the data to research, because as a scientist, when you're going to do research that you know at the end of the day, you want the policy to learn from what you're doing, perhaps they must be able to give you a data so that you know when you're going to do your research, that research will be able to talk to them as well. And on the other hand, you, the scientist, you have done the research, and so what? And then you want to go and sell it to the policymaker. No, that is not also going to work. That is also going to be another challenge. Interpretation of a data to policymaker. You cannot go there as a scientist and say, I've been working in the lab, I've been doing this, and I've been doing this, and you expect the policymaker as well to be able to interpret that. So this is what I'm just saying, that we need to work together. And then the other thing that always becomes funding can also be a challenge, but we all know that, and the duration of the study. And the communication is also important. I want to talk about the qualification between a researcher and the policymaker. And I'm gonna say the way it is, and if I've said it, I will apologize later. One of the experience that the way things are, you will see that I'm a medical scientist by profession. Then I'm so tired of the lab. Then I decided to go and work with the government. And then I become a director for policymaker in energy, as an example. Hello, how am I going to understand? I don't have a background of that energy. Now, what is going to happen? It end up frustrating the researchers that are doing research in energy because we cannot talk the same language. And because of my position as it is. So hence I'm talking about the qualification between a researcher and a policymaker. From the background of health science, you just got a background in health science, you got a job as somewhere policymaker for something that you don't understand, but you've got a job. And guys, these things, they are there, they are happening, and there's the reason why we end up doing that, because you are also there as a director for this policy. You want to protect your job so that this scientist cannot tell you that this is not going to work. So I think that's what I'm saying. Qualification between the researcher and the policymaker is also important, because now everybody needs to talk and to be able to understand. An ideal situation will be, if I am a director in energy and environment, I must have that background so that I'm not going to frustrate the researchers in that background. That would be an ideal situation one day. Now, the other challenges that can also continue, the implementation of those policies. I mean, who is also going to implement those policies, and who's supposed to implement them? And policymaker also can't implement them because they were not the one doing the research. The researcher also can't implement them because they also don't have the access to that. So again, some researcher also, it becomes them to implement. And when we have to implement the thing, it must be translated so that it can also be commercialized, if that is something that we want to do. Of course, we can say not every researcher can be, it's not going to lead to policy, but I can say every researcher must be translated because those are taxpayers' money. Now, coming in conclusion, I think if we can start shifting our mind a little bit, and so that when we start talking about the policymaker and researchers and putting all these things together, let's go the design thinking route. It's very simple. It's going to put all the two together. It's a deliberate cognitive process and mindset so that both researchers and the policymakers and the scientists, they can start working together. It's a proven systematic approach, because at the end of the day, we want one thing. We're trying to solve a problem or an opportunity, shaping that begins with understanding an unmet customer or community needs and delivered users tested. So this is exactly, perhaps that is the way that we can start talking about. And these skills enable design to develop innovative design concept of new products and services. For an example, as I've just given it to you here as policy. So for me, this is the recipe that I will say for the recipe for policy making, working with it. We need to integrate, also work together, the needs of the people, the possibility of the technology, and the requirements of the business success. And I think this is the way that perhaps if we can start working together, we're going to go somewhere. And now I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope I did well with my 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you very much for being honest about our landscape currently, us being scattered and working in silos. Also, you have touched an important thing, us with qualifications that are not aligned to what we are doing in the system. And therefore, that creates some tensions and difficulties in implementation and in understanding the need for us to work together. I don't know how can that be facilitated, because as you have indicated from the beginning, you spoke about political influence. And unfortunately, it doesn't come from scientists. It is all situated in government agencies. And therefore, in that manner, somehow, somewhere, there are some ethics that needs to be involved for us to be able to work together. Thank you very much, Prof. The question and answer time will come where colleagues would even get more insights on your presentation. Thank you very much. Colleagues, then, let's move. Can we make sure that the background noise is eliminated, colleagues, by muting those who seem to be bringing the noise into the space? I will therefore now ask for Dr. Botai to come on board and share with us his own presentation on a perspective on how scholars perceive attitudes to science in policy making in South Africa. Over to you, Dr. Botai.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just setting up the presentation. I'll start with saying that thank you for giving me an opportunity to share. My approach is slightly different. I will talk or touch to policy towards the end, but I felt that the brief I had was to look at climate, climate research and policy, and I felt that maybe I give a strategic mapping of where climate research is in South Africa, and then compare that with the rest of the world, and then make reference to who is supporting this research, that is climate change research, and the policy instruments that support that, and then look at the current policy, climate change policy that exist, the developmental processes, and what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. I have to quickly say that, to be honest, from a scholar perspective and my interactions with various government departments, I can say that government has, relevant government policies or drafty policies are very well drafted. The only problem, as the speakers before me have said, it's, I guess, the translation of those policies as well as, implementation of the policies. So I just a disclaimer I want to just make. But let's look at climate change science landscape globally and also compare that with South Africa. In this first slide, it's just, I've put a question mark that when we look at the climate change science landscape globally, and in the last 50 years, you realize that South African institutions are not topping as the most publishing institutions on climate change research. Whilst the themes that we see here, the key themes that emerge from the scientific publications, range from environmental and ecological, modeling and simulation, as well as social and management issues, we really don't see the, South African institutions topping in that, in that field. But the key themes, as I've said, are what we deal with here locally. Now, in my next slide, we're looking at the research investment parameters, and this actually is relevant to policy. It's about what policies are there to support research investment in the climate science sphere. If you compare what I call here the gross expenditure for research and development, as well as the full-time equivalent in the purchasing power parity figures, you'll see that South Africa is topping number 4, which is quite good. This is just to demonstrate that the number of articles, or scientific publications that have been generated by scholars in South Africa are actually topping, yet the funding is an issue that we have to look at. But it's not doing very bad. If you look at the number of articles per the gross expenditure for research and development, as well as the number of articles per researcher in terms of the full-time equivalent. And this is quite an interesting result here. If you look at climate change research indicators, and here I'm zooming into country specific, and I've developed 3 key indicators that are capable to demonstrate the contribution that our scholars have. Firstly is what we call the number of articles on climate change related to the country's CO2 emission. That is, if you take a threshold of 300 articles, you will see that South Africa is somewhere after the United States, sorry about the red mark, and it's actually in the 20th position globally. Whilst another indicator that we call the Global Climate Risk Indicator or Index, South Africa has a value of 32.9.
1.50, which is an indicator that is developed over a 2-decade records of what the weather incidences are causing to the economy, to the social fabric, but also the weather vulnerability measured in terms of fatalities per country or losses in US dollars. The third index is what you see on the middle graph that is showing firstly the readiness, South Africa Readiness Index, as well as the vulnerability index. And this index basically demonstrates the country's vulnerability to climate disruption and also the resilience in terms of leveraging private and public sector investments. And the results also actually do not differ. South Africa's values show both a positive trend, that is in terms of readiness, and a negative trend in terms of vulnerability. So zooming into the South African context, I wanted to demonstrate the kind of themes that the researchers are working on. And you will notice that they are not very far from the global context. So issues of vulnerability, issues of adaptation, things to deal with water, issues to deal with seasonal variation of the seasons and their impact on crop production, anomalous temperature values leading to heat waves. Those are key topical issues that researchers are dealing with. But most importantly, it's the networks that South Africa scholars have got networks with other countries. And when a policy framework is set, these are issues that the government has to consider. That I know that the government has bilateral relationships and a number of funding funding opportunities or bilateral funding calls from Department of Science and Innovation, from NRF, or look at, I mean, this graphic here is evidence of such kind of funding or networks arising from funding opportunities. If you look at the publications, so the scholars in South Africa are doing very well in terms of climate change. But most importantly, I think for me, is the institutional networks here. It's about the silo issues that the earlier speakers have mentioned about. The climate change research community or the scholarship does not suffer so much from the silo mentality. As you can see, we have good institutional collaboration. Most universities, you can see here, are collaborating very well. So I wanted to make then a few remarks. Firstly, we applaud government's effort in support of climate research. As we can see from various engagements, such as bilateral research calls, global change research, access, the current scientific landscape, of course, needs to be strengthened. We've noticed that we have decreased research funding. We have research programs that have been miniaturized. It means that they are now the funding monies, the amount of money that is available for research fund has been reduced, so that the researchers or scholars are only handling very small projects that take only maybe a year, as opposed to long-term programs that existed. We noticed that, of course, there is a reduced human capital development. I can mention that in South Africa, the climate research, most of the institutions utilize models that are developed outside, and the current initiative to develop locally relevant climate models are just beginning. Infrastructure development, climate research requires observational data in order to drive models, and we notice that the current observational infrastructure is actually dilapidated. New initiatives such as model development are there to ensure ownership and sense of security, as well as local relevance. So if I go straight to climate change policy, I just want to mention that the first key point here is that the national climate governance is as a result of 2 decades of policy evaluation. And this culminated to the formation of or the initiation of what we call the National Climate Change Response Strategy in 2004, which of course was underpinned by the National Climate Change Response White Paper. Around 2008, an initiative called the SA Climate Change Draft Bill was in, and of course, these policies include the nature or the salient features of these policies included that they scale them to multi-sectoral level so that each sectors develop their own policy. The earlier speaker spoke of energy. We have also climate change policy for health, water, and agriculture, and all those climate sensitive sectors. But also an important salient feature is that the whole policy framework was developed through stakeholder engagement. There are, however, implementation challenges that we can easily notice. Firstly, there is lack of policy alignment, coherence, and coordination. The policy is sometimes very complex and it changes with time. You have a few changes that come on board. There are limited resources, that is staff, there's limited staff, financial resources are scarce. There is also an observation that there is an inherent mistrust during public-private engagement and consultation. Notwithstanding these implementation challenges, there are opportunities. There is an opportunity for aligning the climate change policy with developmental planning. That means that there is need to frame the climate change discussion around developmental benefits and opportunities. It's not just to implement policies without looking at their impacts on society. Strengthening delivery and implementation mechanism is another opportunity. And last but not least, there is need to improve data and the information, that is data, information, public awareness, generally new ways of communication. There is need to learn new ways of communication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Potai. Thank you so much for your contribution. You mentioned a very important thing here about I like the fact that you didn't say good policies, because good policies are only good when they are implemented. But you said they are well drafted. However, there is poor implementation. And I think most of the colleagues before you have mentioned this in a way of having people who have misaligned qualifications to deliver the work that was mentioned by Prof. Montaung. Also, you mentioned our inactiveness that in terms of our research on climate change. And you also mentioned a mission that Prof. Mampoli mentioned, where we will really need to look at that when we deal with climate change research. We also spoke about infrastructure and trust that is not there. And at the end of the day, I think I see cohesiveness in these presentation colleagues, because the majority of them do bring the silo mentality that we have, and also the lack of policy alignment and limited resources. Thank you very much, Doc. Then, colleagues, then let us move to our next speaker, which is Prof. Mpandeli. Over to you, Prof.
Thanks, Chair. Let me upload my presentation. Chair, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate that. I've put my presentation based on the title provided by the organizer, which is a perspective on how scholars perceive attitude to science in policymaking in South Africa. I've decided to use what we call the Water Research Commission knowledge tree. This knowledge tree, it has got 6 components, and it also covers the informed policy and decision making, which is the key theme for this session or event. At the Water Research Commission, we are driving research and development and innovation activities. We fund research focusing on water, agriculture, and sanitation. The most important thing about this knowledge tree is to make sure that each and every proposal that is submitted to us, it needs to address some of these knowledge tree components. A very important, component for us is the informed policy and decision making, which forms a part of the science policy interface. And we also have got the responsibility to make sure that the transformation and redress is not neglected based on our historical experience. And the fact that majority of our projects are community-based projects, we also have got the responsibility to make sure that we empower our communities. We shouldn't just go and mine data and disappear. And based on the research that we have conducted as part of the institutional review, we have added a new component, which is new products and services for economic development. Colleagues, you remember that, if we are just driving our research and development and innovation without making impact on the ground or changing the lives of our people, then such kind of research, it becomes useless, if I may put it that way. Part of our research outcomes, innovations, decision support tools that we developed across various themes within the organization. And I'm happy that University of Venda has organized this, because we have funded a few projects related to water and agriculture activities. And one of the issues that I've emphasized in some of the projects that I'm managing with colleagues from the University of Venda is to address the human capital development in both the water and the agriculture sectors. Why am I saying this? It's based on the fact that we need to build a very strong cohort of young scientists. If you look at the number of projects that I'm managing on behalf of Water Research Commission, 80% of those projects are with universities. And there's a specific reason why I'm doing that. The universities are there to train students. And we do believe that we have got the responsibility to make sure that, we have a mixed bag of inexperienced, researchers, working together with well-established researchers. That is an opportunity. And we are not only focusing only at postgraduate level, we are also focusing at institutional level, and we are also looking at community levels. We have got 3 categories of capacity building initiatives, because we do believe that we need to address this important component. And the last component is under this WRC knowledge tree is the sustainable development solution. And this forms part of our national development plan. It also complements the sustainable development goals, those 17 SDG goals highlighted by United Nations. I was requested to touch few issues about the agriculture sector. As some of you are aware that the agriculture sector uses more than 60% of our water resources, and as Water Research Commission, we've got the responsibility to make sure that our research is addressing water challenges in the country. And I'm happy to say that we are working with the various commodity groups like table grapes, apple, avocado, macadamia, wherein we are also, besides generating knowledge, we're also developing products or innovations that are assisting those commodity groups to use less water, but making sure that they produce more food or high nutritional food. We have also decided to add the look at the health components, which is very, very, very important. And I'm happy to say that we I'm interacting with presidents. They want the WRC to roll a national program looking at the school-based vegetable project. We've already started this work with our colleagues from the Agriculture Research Council. We are also looking at the homestead food gardens, which we are going to run a national program. And the last program, it will be the Urban Agriculture Initiative. These are 3 big programs that are going to address the science policy interface within our space. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, suffice to say that before maybe I start to jump directly to the SDG issues, we also have got the responsibility as an organization to make sure that our research and development and initiatives are aligned with the national priorities, which means that the national development plans is very, very important for whatever activities that we are doing as an organization. And I'm happy to say that when this SDG goals were developed or proposed by heads of state in 2011 during the Bonn conference in Germany, Water Research Commission realigned some of its activities. And I'm happy to say that one of the flagship programs that we are driving is the Water Energy Food Nexus that I'm coordinating. We also have got other flagship program like climate change, water scarcity, and extreme climatic events, and so on. But the Water Energy Food Nexus flagship that I'm driving, it's aligned with goal number 2, which deals with the zero hunger. It's aligned with goal number 6, which deals with clean water and sanitation, and also goal number 7, which deals with affordable and clean energy. But if you look at my slides, the fact that this is about scholars linking up with policy issues and so on, it means that we also have got the responsibility to make sure that we look at goal number 4, which is with quality education. There are also other activities that we are managing. For example, if you look at goal number 15, that with land issues, which is very, very important for us as Water Research Commission. We've already positioned ourselves to say if government is gonna derive this land expropriation without compensation, how is the water going to be allocated during the process? And how do we make sure that we don't fall into the same mistakes that we experienced previously, wherein land was just given to people without giving them proper capacity, without giving them the necessary resources in order to sustain their livelihood. What we are trying to achieve, as part of the SDG initiative, I'm highlighting this based on the fact that Water Research Commission has decided to align its initiatives or research and development activities with National Development Plan, with African Union, Agenda 63, with the Sustainable Development Goals, so that we address issues related to people, planet, peace, and prosperity. And as I've already indicated, heads of states endorsed this. There was 2 years of intensive public consultation and engagement and society and stakeholders around the world. The science policy interface issue that I would like to emphasize, colleagues, is based on the fact that as an organization, we took a decision at strategic level to say all our projects needs to come up at the end of the project. We need to come up with 1 or 2 briefs. It's either it's a ministerial brief, policy or parliamentary or technical brief. The reason why we are doing this is based on the fact that, yes, we are driving research and development and innovation, and not everybody is interested to read more than 200 pages. So in order for us to be at the same level or on the same page with our policymakers, let us put our briefs together. It's either technical or ministerial and so on, and we engage policymakers, because somebody highlighted the fact that the reason why some of these policies are not implemented is also based on the fact that we hired consultants to develop policy on behalf of a certain department, and then you leave that document to policymakers to implement it, whereas they were not a part of the process even, at the beginning. What we are doing, as an organization, we make sure that, any project related maybe to water or agriculture, we also include our colleagues from various government departments from the first meeting until the last meeting, so that when we come up with research outcomes or outputs, they will be able to understand, okay, this is what we were doing, and we were part of this process, and this is the direction that we are taking. Over and above that, besides producing those briefs, we also have got the responsibility to make sure that we disseminate our knowledge to various end users. And we do this through workshops, dialogues, symposium, and so on. I'm happy that Water Research Commission, it has got a very good footprint, not only at national level or at regional level or at continental, but across the globe. You look at our research impact, because we do believe that we need to address the 3 big monsters that we are facing in the country: poverty, high unemployment rate, and inequality. There's no way that we'll dodge or duck and dive those challenges. We are part of government, and we've got the responsibility to make sure that we provide the solutions through our research and development initiative. The other issue that is also facing us is the depletion of natural resources, and the fact that our economy it's not performing well due to various reasons. You know very well what happened 2 weeks ago. But as an organization, how do we make sure that our research output are addressing issues on the ground? And we need to make sure that we work with our key strategic partners. I will talk about the key strategic area that I'm managing. I've got a very good working relationship with industries, with academic institutions, including UNIVEN, our science councils, ARC, it's like brothers and sisters, for the WRC. And we are doing this so that we stimulate the economy of the country, but also making sure that we address issues related to food security. Joel from Source highlighted about the issue, the impact of climate change, and so, which is a big issue. Service delivery protests and all those kind of things. Some people are claiming that, the fact that they can't find a job and they are struggling to access food. That is why we have decided to put those 3 programs: the school-based vegetable program, the homestead food gardens, and the urban agriculture. We are going to drive this and pump a lot of resources in order to address food issues in this country. The incorrect implementation and coordination of policy strategies and so on, I don't want to overemphasize this issue. This is a big problem for us, because we have got a very good policy within agriculture, water sector, and also other key strategic sectors. But when it comes to implementation and coordination, we have a serious problems. And how do we address that? Through the human capital development that we are driving, we will be able, as time progresses, we will be able to address that. There's no shortcuts. We need to make sure that we have a long-term strategy in order to address those issues. And then as a knowledge generation organization, how do we make sure that, I mean, we don't leave anyone behind? We need to create a platform wherein stakeholder dialogue, I mean, is in place, and we need to raise awareness about whatever activities that we're driving. A very good example is the flagship that I've highlighted, the Water Energy Food Nexus. It talks about, I mean, interlinkages, trade-offs, synergies, harmonization of activities among those three sectors, so that we minimize duplication of activities. And by bringing those three sectors together, it gives us an opportunity to put our resources under one roof, making explicit goals and interests of different parties, and also empowers and ensuring inclusiveness. This is very, very important for us. If we fail to address or to generate results that will influence policy activities in this country, then we are just wasting taxpayers' money. And we've got the responsibility to make sure that we provide evidence to say our research has got the ability to address socioeconomic challenges that we're facing in this country. We need to be able to make sure that, I mean, we offer a platform for constructive solutions that include negotiations of trade-offs, synergies, and so on. And over and above that, it is the responsibility of the community of practice to make sure that whatever results or outcomes coming from research and development activities, these outcomes, whether they are negative or positive, they need to be shared with various end users, including policymakers. That is why, for us as an organization, we took it upon ourselves to say, we're going to work with all key strategic partners, so that at the end of the day, we speak with one voice, and at the end of the day, we need to drive our research and development in a nexus or in an integrated manner. Chair, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity. I'm done with my presentation. I hope I stick to the 10 minutes allocated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Pandeli, you have highlighted quite a number of issues that we need to look at, but I think one of the main things that you are covering in your topic is the relevancy of what we are doing in terms of our research, and how do we engage, therefore, with the partners within that space, so that we are able to influence the policies through that engagement and also engaging with them. You also spoke about how we disseminate such research in terms of making it friendly enough for policymakers to make sense of it, and also not to create big documents that they won't be interested in reading. So you talked about capturing them in the way we write. And I think you've given us quite a number of solutions, and also you have grounded us into understanding that whatever we are doing, we should be responsible and accountable to the country, as it is the country that is funding us. Thank you very much, Prof. Colleagues, then we will move now to our next speaker, who is Dr. Castro from HSRC. Over to you, Dr. Castro.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having me here. It's been wonderful to hear different and diverse perspectives on this matter, which is increasingly recognized as critical to our country's development. I had a somewhat different interpretation of our brief for today. I prepared thoughts on the perspectives of scholars, as in people at school and the youth. I'm going to proceed with my reflections on this because I think it's cognate in any sense to really reflect a bit on how the youth perceive science and policy making. So I'll launch straight into it. Firstly, going into some sources of data, we have to put some parameters on this question, and then into some of the policy considerations and matters that should perhaps be on the agenda of science institutions and policy institutions when it comes to the youth. So firstly, one way to understand this is to look at national survey data that has asked about perceptions of science, and there have been quite a few of those run in this country. And analysis of that data shows some interesting trends. From representative samples from surveys in 1999 and 2010 and 2013 and a new one coming up soon, there's some high-level findings that tell us how the youth perceive science and the institutions of science. The first is that there's a clear age is one of the strongest determinants of perceptions of science. In other words, there are big generational gaps in South Africa when it comes to how people perceive science. It's a stronger determinant than education, or income, or geographical location, or race, or gender. And there's some reasons for this. Now, as we look at our data, firstly, the youth have a higher level of promise in science. In other words, the youth are generally more positive about the positive impacts that science can have. They also have higher levels of reservation, in other words, higher levels of concern about some of the negative impacts of science. But overall, once these factors are balanced out, the youth are more positive than older generations about science. And another interesting correlation is about knowledge about science, and we can take several examples. I'll take one from biotechnology, where there was also a national survey run. In this data, also a nationally representative sample, there's a strong age gradient in which younger generations have higher levels of knowledge across the board, tested understanding of terms like genes, DNA, biotechnology, genetic modification, GM food, and the younger generations had significantly higher levels of understanding than the older generations. So we know then that the youth are more positive about science, more engaged with the potential benefits and risks, and have higher levels of knowledge. Now, this is in a sense linked to education, since today's youth are more highly educated than yesterday's youth. But it's also about a generational change in how information is accessed, with today's youth being able to access information online as they wish, the digital divide notwithstanding. So to me, I think what this suggests is that we need to think more seriously about the youth experience of science and policy, including thinking about the information diet, and the issues of social media and science communication and science engagement become increasingly important. Now, this raises the question of what does this mean for South African institutions of science? What is our agenda? So I've outlined some points that I think emerge from the analysis. I think, firstly, we need to support science institutions and policymakers in the changing context of social media and echo chambers, and the dynamic interaction between perceptions of the public and information that the public consumes. And when it comes to the youth, we need to cultivate the capabilities to make sense of a vast landscape of online discourses so that they can more clearly identify areas of concern or opportunity or intervention and be more engaged with both science and policy. Another matter which to me is raised is that public perceptions of science are increasingly entangled with issues of social justice. In other words, with issues of the distribution of wealth and of opportunities and privileges in a society, and this is extremely pronounced in South Africa. And I think the institutions of science and policy need to continue to reflect on our own mandate and constituency and our role in society, and whether social justice can or should form part of the strategies and communication agendas of science institutions. Ultimately, I think this direction would help to build trust amongst the youth. Then there is, I think, on the agenda should be transcending the deficit model of public perceptions. In other words, the model in which the public lacks scientific knowledge and we should remedy this by providing more correct information. Now, this paradigm has long been critiqued, but it is still an ongoing challenge. And I think South African science institutions need to move beyond just educating and informing the population about science to engaging the youth more actively. So we should continue to grow our support for youth engagement and public participation in ways that value local knowledge and allow scientists to learn from the youth. There's no doubt that there's enormous potential there. Then in an information environment that provides increasing space for anti-science narratives, we need to cultivate narratives that strengthen the legitimacy of science and reinforce the contract between science and society. And nowhere is this more clear than issues related to COVID, protection, vaccination, as well as climate change. These are global emergencies that require intervention from the institutions of science and the institutions of policy. Now, one of the interesting findings in global studies of perceptions of science is that when scientific consensus is communicated, it has a powerful effect. So there is, I think, greater potential for South African institutions of science to leverage that strategic strength of being perceived as an honest broker of scientific information and communicating scientific consensus to bolster the confidence in science of the youth. Then there are complex demographic issues at play. Perceptions of science are a function of rationality. In other words, people cognitively reach their destinations, but they're also functions of identity. And the way people feel about science is deeply rooted in who they are and not just how they think. So science literacy, in other words, how much knowledge one has about science, has some impact, but political and economic and social variables have a much greater impact on how people perceive science, what it is, whether they have confidence in it or not, and so on. And this includes controversies or narrative divergences when it comes to COVID-19 and climate change. So we understand perceptions of science and its nexus with policy as a cultural construct. And I think, South African institutions of science would benefit from continued reflection and debate and research on the many cultures of science that exist in South Africa. And the diversity of these cultures defies any kind of overarching taxonomy or model, and needs to be understood almost ethnographically and locally in order to make sense of it. But what we can say is that close working relationships with local science institutions and organizations, as well as educational institutions such as schools and youth organizations, would be required to design and implement effective communication and engagement strategies. Now, from a policy point of view, from a science policy point of view, I would say there is insufficient institutional support and incentive for scientists to communicate and engage. The incentive structures that we face favor publication over engagement, and I think we could consider ways of working with science institutions to change that. Now, when it comes to COVID specifically, and this is on all of our agenda, I think it's really important that institutions of science develop narratives that counter the anti-science, populist conspiracy narratives that have emerged in the public sphere, largely as a consequence of public demand and other advantages that narrative spinners can create from these narratives. But these narrative strategies must not only be reactive. I think we need to extend beyond countering narratives and encompass the development and propagation of our own stories about science and scientific controversies and what this means for the public and what this means for the youth. Then finally, I think South Africa is always such a fascinating place because of its cultural diversity. But within this, I think we need to reflect on the culture of science that exists in this country. What possibilities can be imagined for creating a South African social contract for the role of science in society? Can we develop a consensus about the meaning and value and impact and authority of science in its many facets, including the relationship between science and policy? Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Castro. Thank you so much for bringing us into data, what it says, and also giving us a view on what the current youth perceive and know in terms of science, which means that they are scientific literate. And what does that mean for the institution of higher learning? What does it mean for the society? And your proposals for culture of science in South Africa, as well as science for public good, that are coming forward. It's quite an interesting angle, but at the same time, I think it does speak to what we've been talking about today. However, you are saying you are bringing to us who is the youth and what is it that they have and what contribution can they make and what is it that we need to do to tap onto that contribution. Thank you very much. Colleagues, this was our last speaker for the day, and I will therefore give over to Prof. Mukhalaka to facilitate the question and answer process. Thank you very much, colleagues. I highly appreciate all the presenters that have presented this afternoon. Over to you, Prof. Mukhalaka.
Thank you, Professor. In the interest of time, I will ask our participants to pose the questions in the chat function, and perhaps if they can also indicate who they are posing the question to. There is already a question from Suraya. And I think this is posed to Professor Mampueli. Do we have a model to share excess energy that is created by solar and receive credit for this on our electricity bill? Pensioners have to budget to survive. However, service plus network charge on the City of Johannesburg bills doubles the monthly charge. So how do we ensure that there are sustainable, that renewable energy is sustainable also to the finances of our pensioners? So this I will direct to Professor Mampueli.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting kind of a question. We currently don't have a model that subsidizes that works in a way that can favor the pensioners. Apart from what I know as the 50 kilowatt hours that government makes available to those who cannot afford. The Eskom wheeling system is mainly applicable to the large consumers. So if you have a solar farm, for instance, and you wheeling your power to a particular customer, then that works for you, and you can bank some of your electricity if you produce more. Now that Eskom also has a system where you can supply electricity. You can build your own solar farm or solar plant on top of your roof if you're a shopping mall or something, and then you can then offset. They call it the offset one. You can then offset whatever you're drawing from Eskom through your solar PV. And if you generate more for that particular month, then you can then do what they call banking. So you bank what you've generated, and then you can then use it the following month. And that process goes for about, you can do that for about 12 months. And after 12 months, then you lose all your credits that you have banked in the past. So I don't know about well, in terms of the households, you can still have embedded generation. I know of regulations that have got to do with various municipalities. Each municipality has got their own regulation to say this is the kind of system that you can have on your roof, and they have a model in terms of, it's also an offset kind of a situation, but you need to take something from Eskom still. So you can save by having your solar system on top of the roof. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mampheli. So essentially, we cannot be 100% of the grid. Is that how I understand it?
We can be 100% of the grid. So take for instance the city of Cape Town. They allow embedded generation. So you can either do embedded generation where you have a 3 kilowatt inverter and your solar PV, but you need to take a certain percentage of your power from the grid still. But then if you want to go completely off the grid, they don't stop you from doing that. You notify them, and then they come and take their meter, they take away their installation, and then they leave you with your solar system that will be completely off the grid. So you can go off the grid.
Thank you. I will ask if there are any further questions to be posed on the function. And also, I would also like to remind the participants to complete the survey about your experience with this colloquium. Also, the link is supplied in the chat function. So we are 2 minutes away from 2 o'clock. And in the interest of time, I would really like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers, our panel of expertise for all their expert commentary. I would also like to thank Professor Feza for introducing our panel, and also for just the reflections that you provided after each and every speaker. And also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all the participants. We have had a very consistent attendance, starting from 30 participants just after 12 to 52. So I think we've done very well. People really stayed on to listen to the expert commentary from our panelists. We really appreciate this so much. Also would like to invite you to other activities that we will be participating in as UNIVEN, together with our partners, the HSRC, TIA, and UNISA. So you can find more information on social media platforms, also on the NRF SASTA website, and also UNIVEN website, and all the stakeholders' website. And finally, before closing, I'd like to thank the NRF and SASTA for really providing this platform where we can take science to communities. And I really hope to see you in all our next engagement throughout the week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Enjoy the rest of the
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.